you have to find 1 or 2 startups from NMIMS Indore itself in 3 to 5 years time. One thing I've been talking to student entrepreneurs a lot. So one thing I've noticed that they're very hesitant to share their ideas because what they think in their mind is that someone would try to steal their idea. So, but what I think is that they're missing on that networking opportunity. They're missing on that valuable inputs that the individual can give them. So, what are your views on this?
I'll actually defer that to you first because you already have a couple of businesses that are running.
Yeah.
So you'd be able to start and then I'll come to that.
No, I have very clear views on this. There was also a talk. It was titled $1 Billion Ideas, which I gave with I think Sharda University, and it's a video which is there. So my view is I give actually very little weight. I'll call it almost close to zero weight sometimes to the idea. And where does the weight go to in terms of whether the startup will succeed? It goes to the entrepreneur. What is their thought? Because you keep pivoting and you get somewhere, and the execution of the idea. So highly unlikely that you would come up with an idea, and just because of the innovativeness of the idea itself, it will be a successful venture. You look at Apple, right? Or you look at Paytm. They're very general things. All of us can think about it. You look at all the unicorns, and there are some nowadays. You have globally, if you look at it, there are n number of unicorns every day which are becoming unicorns. In India itself, it was so. There's so many ideas which are coming up. It's about going after a problem, right? And I would say the problem is important here, not the solution. You commit yourself to solving a problem. Like you mentioned, rivers need to be clean. Any problem you look at, right? You can look at education, you can look at housing, I'm looking at Byju's, Paytm. What are the problems they went after? And then whatever technology it takes, whatever ideas it takes to solve that problem, you stay committed to that. And if it is a large enough problem for a large enough market, you'll be able to create value, right? But so my views are, just to sort of put it perhaps a little provocatively, there's nothing you lose by sharing your ideas. There's only thing you gain. And what really matters is getting down to executing it, because you'll need to pivot. If you're doing anything innovative which nobody has done, you can't sketch it out the whole thing. So it is an iterative process, and in the process of execution is where you sort of create value, right? So IP, patents, protection of your ideas is important. I'm not sort of saying that, and there it becomes, you can't file a patent if it is perhaps paper you can probably still publish, but the first one matters, right? So those are important things, but mostly for business ideas, they may already be things which have been published or patented, but nobody has sort of done it. And for many of them, you may not even need that, right? So, that's sort of my clear response to that.
Sure. So no, I totally agree, right? Sharing is important. Getting people's inputs is very important, because there's this old Harvard study. It's been a few years at least now, maybe a decade, which says that only 3% of businesses succeed. 90%, 97% fail, right? So our society actually also needs to be balanced. We cannot put entrepreneurs on a very high pedestal, because they have to get accustomed to the idea of failure as well. So if you put that person up here, if they fail, then they are destroyed, because we build them up to be something that they were not. So that idea of failure is something we have to embrace as a society, as entrepreneurs, as again the people around the entrepreneurs, right? Coming back to your question, this when he was speaking, actually something came to my mind. I came to know this very recently. I think it was J.C. Bose who had this idea. He actually had an idea, if I'm not mistaken, for a telephone before it was invented. And what I was told was, and I confirmed this on Wikipedia and other places as well, what I was told was that he went on this journey with Marconi to the US. He was going for something else, but he had already had this idea. He discussed this with Marconi, and today we know Marconi as one of the inventors of the telephone, right? Okay, along with maybe Alexander Graham Bell. So the premise is that this idea of an Indian was stolen by somebody else. So, do these things happen? Quite possibly. Have I known ideas in academics that have been stolen for papers? Most definitely. But in most cases, would you stand to lose if you do not share ideas, if you do not get people's responses to your ideas, their comments, their inputs? Of course you will. Because remember, only 3% of businesses succeed. 97% fail, right? So from that point of view, it is very important that if you have somebody like him who's been an entrepreneur for 20 years, you yourself are a 20-year-old. So he's seen 20 years of successful businesses. He's seen 20 years of failures. He can tell you, look, you should be doing this and not that. Out of your 3 ideas, please focus on this one because it seems to be the best idea for go-to-market. It's about success in the marketplace. If you do not talk to people who know the marketplace, how will you succeed? Remember, we are saying 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds are better placed than us to set up a new business. But even those people need the right inputs. They need benefit of discussion with people with the right experience to succeed. 15-year-old cannot do everything on their own, right? But if you don't discuss that idea with somebody who's 35, 40, even 75, I know people who are 80, 85-year-old who are part of incubators. That person has 60 years of experience in that field. Of course, you should be talking to him, right? But you should also be careful about which, avenue, which forum you are engaging those people on. Choose your forums, but do engage. Because without engagement, the probability of failure grows up drastically, right? So of course you have to use your judgment, but generally speaking, yes, you should be talking to people about your ideas.
So we can say that the power does not lie in the hands of the person who holds the idea, but who has the passion to actually execute it to the end.
And with that marketing example, perhaps with the person who identifies the potential in the idea. True. And who goes on to execute it, right? If you sort of have the idea, you have not identified its potential, or you're not committed to its execution for whatever reason, right? Then it just won't go anywhere, right? Yeah. So,
looking at student entrepreneurs, one more hurdle that they face is trying to build teams. So they're not very sure who to keep in their team and who not to keep in their team. So how should a student entrepreneur go about that?
There are 2 ways of looking at it. First, as somebody who had at least some experience of being an entrepreneur, it's not easy to get the right people. It can be quite difficult. So in our case, we had to try several people before we got to the right team composition. So it takes a while, okay? And you can at times get the right team member before getting the right idea. So you might have the right person in front of you today, but the right idea might come to you 10 years later. At which point in time, that person would be the right team member for that idea, business idea. Do remember that. Networking and business ideas, you don't have to go together. One can happen before the other. Okay? Having said that, is it very important to have the right team? Most definitely. Okay? Because at some point in time, you realize that an individual has only so much bandwidth. You can only do so many things. But if you are really, going for the stars, if you are really thinking of becoming a unicorn, you need a large team as soon as possible. constraints should be funding, constraints might be space, it might be how quickly your company is growing. Of course, you won't hire people before you need them, right? Maybe one person can perform two roles, therefore you need one person less at the beginning. All those things, they would differ from startup to startup, from company to company. But do remember, successful companies, any successful organization actually for that matter, is about having the right team for the right idea. So don't try to go alone. Don't try to go in a 2-3 people team. If you have a requirement for more people, more numbers, please try to get the right people for those roles. You can take a little more time to get the right person for your HR. But not having a person for the HR function, that is not a good idea, right? So from my side, that's the first thing I would say.
Yeah, no, fully agreed. I would say ideally, 2 or 3 co-founders is probably the sweet spot. And it's very difficult. The closest comparison I have is your marriage. It is of, it's really of that type, because you're probably going to be spending a lot of time with your co-founders, and personal chemistry there is extremely important. And it sort of gets tested a lot in both kinds of circumstances, when the times are tough and also actually when you've hit success. And it's not, it's a very personal thing. So in fact, one of the biggest reasons for startup failures in execution is co-founders chemistry related, right? And it is a very lonely thing, right? So you can have like one person. There are several examples of that. There are some advantages of that as well, but it's definitely not sort of the ideal or sweet spot. But at the same time, just like in marriage or other places, it's very difficult to find the right sort of partners. And therefore, I think what he said is very interesting and very important. You may, in your journey, in your life, find people whom you think ki inke saath we have to do something, right? This is the person I want to, but the idea may come in later, right? Because that's the thing. Secondly, for example, here in NMIMS Indore, one thing which I've been constantly sort of saying is the right thing is the mix of different skills and faculties in business and tech, for example. The ideal founding team would be someone from the business side. I mean, the assumption is, of course, they have learned those skills and presumably they are passionate about that, right? And similarly on the tech side. And that makes a balanced team, right? You could be cross-functional, it's not necessary. But in general, what I'm trying to say is the ideal co-founding team would be people of complementary skills, complementary passions. Because to build a business, you need all of those skills. If it is a technology business, you need tech and business. And within business, there's so many things. You need sales, you need finance, you need HR, everything. And one person can't be sort of master in everything, right? Maybe in 1 or 2 things. So ideally, it's a difficult thing. It's a very important thing. One of the probably most important determinants of success. As I said, even investors, they would put a lot of weight on just the team and relatively less on the idea. Those are the things they would see, because if you're a good team, if you're a strong team, you will come up with ideas, you will pivot, you will be successful one way or the other anyway. So it is a very important thing. It is something which you should do with a lot of thought and deliberation. The ideal for me would be 2 or 3 people. It is sort of difficult to achieve. So you should, co-founder dating, etc. I think these are very helpful and required things. That enough to put together people who have these complementary thoughts. And it's not just about skills; it's also about cultural fit, right? Trust. those kind of things, just like in a marriage, sort of generally become more important as you go along.
The team should be structured in such a way so that even on the main parts, on some parts they agree, but they provide a different view from their ends.
Absolutely.
So apart from these intellectual and technical guidance, what do you think is necessary to educate or guide the student entrepreneur about?
If you are talking about deep tech, for example, you know how big Google is, right? You could be a startup that is going into the market competing against Google in one particular small area. You can't compete with all of Google. You can't compete with all of Tesla, for example. But one small area, right? Maybe you'll compete against them in any market. You could be competing against State Bank of India or a Procter and Gamble or whoever. So you are a business at that point in time. What are the skills you need? You need all the skill sets that larger businesses have to be able to compete against them. So do you need technical expertise? Of course, right? If you're talking about deep tech, do you need the expertise? Most certainly, right? Do you also need somebody who understands the marketing aspect? Yes. So in today's day and age, they have to be good at storytelling. They have to be good at trying to get the attention of their audience wherever it is and being able to explain that idea in 2 minutes, elevator pitch kind of a thing, right? So that is where our experience Shark Tank that people watch, it comes in handy because you've seen hundreds of people maybe by now. Even though you'll never set up a business probably. Most of us on average, right, won't set up a business, but we've seen those people. So you need somebody like that. It could be all of them, all of the people in the business, but maybe at least one person should be like that, who really captures the imagination, right? Who's the Steve Jobs kind of a role person in that company. You need people who need an understanding of finance because as you've seen with the Byju's case, there can be many problems. Sometimes people do wrong things deliberately. Sometimes they just do not know. In every failure, you'll find something to learn from. But the idea is, do we need somebody who has a good understanding of accounting and finance? Yes. Company starts becoming bigger, you need somebody for the HR function. Because again, you'll have the partners and founders multiple times, right? But you'll also have employees. A founder versus an employee has a very, very different motivation. An employee who's given some stock options has a very different motivation from an employee who's given zero stock options. Please understand, right? So that is, of course, the founder themselves can take care of it, the entrepreneurs. But generally speaking, that would be the role of the HR function. In today's day and age, you are getting more and more people interested in training people for this kind of a space. So recently I've come across some ads where people are promoting a chief of staff kind of a role for even startups. Basically a person who's got some inputs in every area. Right? What are they good at? My guess is they're good at strategy. They're good at business analytics, handling large amounts of data, to cull the right information from, to get the right results from, the right recommendations from. Okay, so that is a new role that is coming up, which people didn't speak about probably maybe 5 years ago even, or even 2 years ago, right? So from that point of view, what our role would be to have these student entrepreneurs that are coming up and inform them about all of these requirements. And maybe, Dipinder already has the experience. In my case, maybe over time, develop the experience to help them time the entry of the right person with the right skill at the right time. Because every new individual is a cost to the company. So you have to be able to sustain the cost, either with external funding or your own funding. The requirement also has to be there. Just because you have a friend or a relative who wants to become a part of the company and contribute doesn't mean you bring them in at any point in time, right? So that also has to be timed correct. But of course, it is the idea of developing the right team over time. Okay, so that is this kind of support that from our side as academics, as mentors, we would like to give to new ventures by student entrepreneurs? Yeah.
Right. I fully agree with what he has said. There is one thing which, at least in my journey, I found very important. There are the specifics which will apply to the specific startups. It'll, like, if you are doing something in healthcare, then those are what I'm calling specifics, and I think what you meant by intellectual and But the general bit which every entrepreneur needs to sort of understand and be very sharp and clear about, that's what I'll talk about. And I referred to it in the talk earlier. Profit is charity. That's the article. See, we have to understand, and again, coming in India from a particular sort of mindset, we are very shy of even talking about profits. We measure success personally and of startups, etc., by its financial metric. But we are sort of ourselves not convinced, and we almost are guilty. We feel guilty. I mean, it's like very, what do you say, selfish to try and generate more and more of money. And so, there I would, I mean profits as different from revenue, as different from profitability, which is profit percentage, as different from valuation. They are, of course, generally in the same direction, right? If you are a capitalist or a liberal, profit is a measure of value add to the society. That's what I would feel. If you're making losses, then you are actually destroying value, right? And that is why I mean profit in a very specific way. And I mean, normally I don't see how one could scale and sustain. You, of course, have all of these startups who are listing and they've not made a profit, but everyone is probably convinced, and that's why they would invest, that they'll eventually make profits and turn all of it around. So that's fine as long as you are clear. But otherwise, if you are running a for-profit business which would scale and really add some value to society, really solve a problem, really create value, then it has to be focused on profits, right? And then a corollary, like a close cousin of that, is cash surplus, which is slightly different because taxes and TDS and all of that. So one has to be clear about that. But that is where more intricacies of finance and working capital and all of that will come in. But fundamentally, whatever you are producing as your offering, the cost you are incurring for that at a unit economics level has to be less than what somebody, your clients, your customers are ready to pay for it. And they'll do that if they extract greater value out of that in their own lives or in their own supply chain or businesses, right? So that is one thing which I think I would want to sort of convey to entrepreneurs. And again, all of this should be challenged. It should not just be taken because somebody is saying it, so that it is also absorbed more deeply. And then if it is in your bones, then you'll sort of you can't be in a situation where you're running a business, you're trying to build a venture, and you are shy of making profits, or you think it's something wrong to do, right? It just won't work. And you have to, it's such a difficult thing. 3% success rate is what you mentioned. You can't afford not to be sharp, right? Because every day you'll need to take decisions, and something may be helpful to increase revenue, something for valuation, something for profit, something for some other thing. And they may all feel right. And also for what period. Profit, you may want to invest and incur a loss this year so that the 3-year profit increases, or your 10-year profit increases. So short term versus long term. That has to be very sharp and clear, and also aligned amongst all the co-founders, board members, shareholders, whatever. So if I would choose one thing, that will be this.
Okay, so let me ask you a counter question to that. So why do you think VCs invest in startups?
Firstly, what they look for is the applicability of the idea and the vision and the passion that the entrepreneur has, and what kind of returns that entrepreneur can give to that investor or VC.
Absolutely. So it is basically about not just supporting somebody who's got a wonderful business idea. Of course, all of us want to do that. Honestly speaking, I think as a society now in India, we want to do that as a collective, right? For a VC, it is so often about profits. It's about getting the right return. The kind of profits that they make, the successful VCs, I hadn't even heard of some of those rates of return most of my time growing up, even after my MBA. So they're very, very successful. But they're successful because they put the right amount of money in the right number of businesses. Again, the VC model is such 10 businesses fail, one succeeds, they've recovered and they've made 30% return on the year, right? So from that point of view, what they want is the right person, the age of the person, the qualifications of the person do not matter. If that mattered, Facebook would not exist the way it does right now. Reliance would not exist. We haven't taken the example of Adani. Lots of good and bad news about Adani, around Adani. Lots of things can be said. But this is a gentleman who I have been told could not speak proper English. He used to carry take a translator with him on a scooter. The translator would be in the front. He'd be sitting in the back with his bag. They would go from place to place, from investor to investor, from somebody who could give the person an order. So that is how he went around, Mr. Adani, to set up his business. Today, we are at a level where the rest of us can sit back and say good or bad things about his business. But that man went for so many things, had so many experiences over 20 years. You put him in front of a VC today, there is a chance the VC would say no to him because of his experience, because of the fact that he can't speak English like an Englishman or American would, right? But in the end, we have to remember, even as VCs, angel investors or anybody else, it is the individual. Forget where they come from. They could be from Dharavi or any other place on earth, right? If they have the right idea, which makes the right amount of money, most definitely you should be investing in that. Most definitely you should be backing them up. Forget their education or how they look or how they speak English or any other language. It is in the end the strength of that idea and what you make of it and whether or not you think it will make that money for you and that person in the end. That's all from my side.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. See, investment, VCs, angel investment, or any investors are also very specialized, right? What amount of investment, etc. And there are some who are focused on early stage investment, and student thing would fall under there. But investors across these categories, they have one single sort of thing they're optimizing on, which is their returns, right? It's not about them favoring someone. In fact, if you have a strong idea and a team and the investors get a whiff of it, they'll be after you. That is how it should be, because they would otherwise lose in their business, and somebody else, their competitor investor would gain that, right? So for them to survive and thrive, they have to be be in a position first to invest and find those diamonds in terms of entrepreneurial ventures. It is interesting how and this I sort of earlier in our early days, I kind of went to few investors who did not invest because my ask was less than their lower bound. Right? And I was like surprised that I was like, the lower the ask, the easier it should be, right? But I now sort of understand the logic. There are, for example, a Series A investor would not invest in, they're not equipped to, their whole process of validating ideas, etc. For example, they don't have the expertise, you could say, to judge or to invest in or to mentor. It's not just investing, it's what happens after that till they exit a student early stage pre-revenue venture, for example. That's not their expertise. So it's also important who you go to, And then there certainly are investors who focus on early stage, even perhaps student ideas. So, for example, I would be focusing on that, right, in terms of incubating and supporting that, because that's sort of, let's say, my experience and expertise. So you have to go to the right folks, and then absolutely nothing matters except what they see as the opportunity for them, and you are also favoring them by giving them an opportunity to participate in your venture, to put capital in your venture, right? So there's no bias, and there's a lot of opportunity. Some people will choose this niche of investing, early stage student, because it's like any business. You can invest, and there's competition amongst investors, and there's value to be made. And some people would believe there's greater value to be made in early stage ventures, because later on it becomes a different game, right? They're all good. So you have to go to the right people, and then there's no bias at all.
Coming to the end of the podcast, we've learned all about various aspects about the journey of a student entrepreneur, ranging from how to utilize the resources of the university, how to learn from the expertise of the faculties, what needs to be done when entering the market, etc. I'm sure these valuable insights will pave a long way of clarity for the students. Thank you.